This presentation is provided by BoardPaq LLC for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The opinions expressed by the presenters are their own and not necessarily those of BoardPaq. On behalf of BoardPaq, we welcome you to today's webinar. BoardPaq has teamed up with Amazon's #1 best-selling author in board governance, Thomas Bakewell, and fundraising guru Carol Wiseman to help educate boards on the latest industry trends. The Boardroom webinar series will focus on different topics each month. I wanted to mention really quickly that BoardPaq is a secure, affordable, and easy-to-use paperless board meeting solution. Users can access materials from the native iPad app or through a web browser on other devices. Private annotations, minutes builder, and unlimited document storage are a few highlights of what we have to offer. Before we jump into today's topic, let me tell you a little bit about today's speakers. Thomas Bakewell works to bring out the best your team has to offer. He is the author of the book, Claiming Your Place at the Boardroom Table. Over the past 30 years, Thomas Bakewell has advised and directed CEOs and presidents of large for-profit and nonprofit corporations. His vast board experience has made him a leader and go-to source in board governance. Carol Wiseman, president of Board Builders, is an internationally known speaker, author, trainer, and consultant. Carol specializes in volunteerism, fundraising, and governance. Carol won a Telly Award for her PBS special, Building a Board with a Passion for Mission. Her board experience is vast, having served on 38 boards and served as president of 7. Carol and Tom, take it away.
Great to be here. Carol, we're just going to dive right into the slides here. We've got one that talks about choosing the right board members and coming together for strategies for engaging boards. What are one of the top pieces of advice you can give us on choosing the right board members?
Well, first of all, you have to be on a board that chooses board members, and many boards, they're elected, especially in the association market. But that doesn't mean you can, number one, you can't discourage people who are under-medicated, or that you can't encourage people who have real talent. And I find this especially true with that under 30 group, that very talented 28-year-old who doesn't think that they're ready for the board, and you know they have the talent to do it. So get the right people in the room.
So get the right people in the room. Here's the way I like to say that, and I've seen other people say it this way: talent counts and talent wins. So you don't need to be passive about electing your boards. And in fact, a lot of times when it comes to strategically moving a board in the right direction, what would you do if you were looking to strategically move a board in the right direction?
Well, basically, this is my assessment, is that you know some of these things in advance. Some things we don't know, like Hurricane Katrina and that sort of thing, so you can't always prepare for that. But you may know that your executive is going to retire, you're going to be doing a search, a capital campaign, you're going to expand your reach either into another country, another state, another county, you may be rebranding, whatever. And so if you're going to be doing any of these activities, and you know this is part of your long-term strategy, you have to have people in the room who know something about it, who have either been through the process or are experts in the process.
So you really, at some level, if you're the board chair or you're the executive committee or just a good, diligent board member, you want to have done an assessment of what you need?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So what's that look like? I mean...
Well, and one of the things with a board assessment is taking a look and having your strategic plan in the room when you decide where you want to go.
Okay. Now you got a question here. What's the difference between a board member and a volunteer? Now I could guess on some of that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I could say that
Give it a stab, friend.
What's the difference between the roles and the responsibilities? And the board member has the true fiduciary duties for making sure the basics of duty of care, duty of loyalty are getting taken care of. But I'm not sure what you have in mind here. Surprises.
You're absolutely right. A board member is morally, legally, and fiscally responsible. Okay. So if I've joined a board, I can be sued, whether it's a nonprofit association or for-profit board, if I don't show up. And I know there may be listeners who have board members they've never met. And that's not okay. They have a place in your organization, but it shouldn't be at the board level. And a volunteer can show up or not show up, and they're not responsible. So if I say, oh, I'm going to help you out with whatever, and I don't show up, I'm not responsible in the sense I'm morally responsible, but I'm not legally responsible.
So you're doing a good comparison here between a board member and a volunteer and kind of a deep dive. But just give us a tip or two, though, on really engaging a great volunteer. We're here talking about engaging board members. Give us a tip or two on engaging a volunteer and engaging board members.
Number one, it's asking the right questions.
Okay.
How would you like to serve? And a lot of us make assumptions. So you're a CPA. If I get you on the board, you may or may not want to be the secretary or the volunteer on the.
You don't want me on your finance committee?
I may want you on my finance committee, but you may not want to be on the finance committee. And so I've worked with an organization where one of their volunteers was an architect. He wanted nothing to do with plans. He was very interested in working with children and finding out how to educate them about plant science.
So on the one hand, he had great knowledge in a particular skill set, but that was his day job, and he was really looking to feed his soul and pursue a passion elsewhere, and that's why he was on as a volunteer or a board member.
Yeah, he was a volunteer, and he loved it.
Okay. So one of the big topics today is the key area of diversity, and diversity can certainly mean a lot of things. Now I'm seeing two handsome fellows here, and they don't look particularly diverse to me. What do we got going on here?
Well, the funny thing is they actually are diverse. My husband is the one on the left, and he hates this picture because when this picture was taken, Frank was 63, and the gentleman on the right is my cousin Susie's husband, and he's 75. So Frank hates this picture because they do look, we call them brothers from another mother. They're actually quite different in that Richard on the right is a fabulous businessman. My husband is a physician and very shy. So in many ways, they're quite different. Richard on the right is Jewish. Frank was raised Unitarian. They're actually different guys, but the perception is as important as the reality. And so what does diversity mean for your organization? And it can be quite different.
So in terms of board recruiting, where do you
Absolutely.
go with where do you use the definition of diversity? Where do you use your strategy? How do you use your brains to come up with the right board members?
One of the things you have to do for your board is define diversity. Okay. So, for instance, if you were the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Miami, ethnic diversity will not be Hispanic and non-Hispanic. It may well be Puerto Rican, Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Argentinian, and then you've got the Brazilians, and they speak Portuguese. Okay. It's not one lump. Okay. Whereas if you live in a place like we do in St. Louis, it may be Hispanic because it's not such a broad range.
Right. So what you're saying is you have to be very thoughtful about what diversity is and what it means, and it's part of the agenda for a board in its recruiting.
Exactly, and also sometimes it has to do with experience. Okay. So whether you are on a breast cancer board and you're a survivor, or you've never had a personal experience.
So diversity isn't just about race. It just isn't about gender. It's a very, very broad definition.
Can be age, can be skill, can be experience. And you have to have them all listed.
Yeah. Of course, we do want to note that some key areas of diversity, like race, still need a lot of focus and a lot of attention.
Absolutely. And I have a friend in Rochester, New York, who's an extremely successful African-American physician. I asked her how often she gets asked to be on boards, and she said probably not more than 20 to 25 times a year.
There you go.
25 times.
Obviously in high demand because of enormous skills.
Enormous skills, fabulous contacts. Plus she was a model, so she's even decorative. So, I mean, she's got it all going, and everybody wants her.
You're going on the edge here.
Well, and the other thing that's important is and this is what you want from every board member, she's diligent, she's smart, and she's generous.
Yeah, that's a perfect combination.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what some of the expectations are once you target some of these great diverse board members. What are the expectations, and how do you communicate, how do you clarify those with a prospective or a new board member?
I think you have to do it in two ways. I think you have to do it verbally, and you have to do it in written form. And the reason is some people are auditory learners, some are visual learners. And if you expect them to come to 12 meetings a year and you mention it, and there's a squirrel that goes by, they may miss that.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be out of town for 6 months a year.
Okay.
And so I think you have to have a board commitment letter that has everything spelled out, and you also have to go over it verbally.
Okay.
So let's take a look at that.
Let's explain that. Let's jump back and explain that cartoon to me just for a second.
Sure.
What are you telling us there? What's that?
Oh, don't
saying?
worry. The expectations are the same as ever, only completely different. And here's what happens, and this is very common.
It's like job descriptions.
Very much so. But what happens is you join a board, and this is one of the things that we saw in 2008, 9, and 10, is a board could be in a great financial position, and all of a sudden there's a hostile takeover.
Right.
And you're dealing with mergers and all kinds of stuff, and what was going to be maybe 100 hours a year turns into 2,000. Expectations with a corporate board. With a nonprofit board, same kind of thing. 2008, 9, and 10, everything was copacetic, and all of a sudden in the nonprofit field, 50% of all nonprofits had to lay off staff.
They had operating losses, they had to lay off staff, so suddenly a day job or a day commitment to a charity turned into a full-time job almost for a lot of people.
Exactly. Yeah. So things change, and some of the boards, the nonprofit boards, there may have been no financial expectations, and all of a sudden I go, oh, Tom, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this.
Yeah, 10 grand a year.
No, not for you, 20.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, and when they joined the board, it was, we're getting fee for service from the government.
Yeah, and I'll get back to you on that. I just had that conversation last night, driving a long drive home on the phone with somebody talking to a board member of a great charity here in town, and they're wondering why their fundraising isn't taking off. And I said, well, what's the personal minimum commitment for each board member? And he said, well, it really isn't one. And I said, well, you haven't been plowing the field and doing the basics. So let's look at your list here. When somebody's coming on the board, you've got what's called a board commitment letter. So you're actually talking about a formal letter that goes in their hand. Do they sign it?
Absolutely.
Is there a signing ceremony, like signing up a high school soccer player to go to college? What do you do?
I don't think you'd draw a very large crowd.
Okay.
But in fact, there should be some kind of ceremony, and part of it depends on whether it is a running admission or if you bring people in as a class.
Okay.
So what you need to cover is the attendance policy. Financial expectations are always the trickiest.
Especially in the not-for-profit world.
I don't know. I think in the for-profit world as well.
Are we going to be paid? How much are we going to be paid? What's the pay look like? Sure, absolutely.
And how much stock do I have to buy?
Absolutely.
Do I need to have $100,000 worth of stock so I have some skin in the game?
Right.
And for some of us, $100,000 is a whole lot of skin.
A whole lot of skin.
And for some of us, nobody that may be listening today, it's chump change.
I've got a dear friend who fits the profile of the doctor you're talking about earlier. She's a player that everybody wants on her board, and she loves to tell her story. Her first story was she went on a board where they gave a lot of stock, and it was a high-flying stock, and then it immediately cratered, and she basically worked for 3 years for next to nothing, actually nothing. And she called that, her seed capital and paying her dues. It was fortunately it was her first board, and she had a remarkable experience because it was a train wreck situation that they salvaged. But she spent hundreds of hours for several years learning the business of being a good board member. What else do you have here other than financial expectations?
Role in special events or the annual meeting.
Okay.
And again, an annual meeting commitment can be 5 days in a hotel, so it can be a lot of time and effort. And special events, I joined a board one time, and I taught them how to write this, and they said that you have to bring a foursome to the golf tournament.
Right.
Well, I'm not a golfer, and we had to sit down and talk about it, and I said, how can I be a part of this without playing golf? Because
I'm not coming.
Well,
or you don't want me there.
You don't want me there, and I've never picked up a golf club in my life, and I don't have friends who golf. Yeah. If it were a bridge tournament, I'd be in good shape. Okay. Needle pointing golden.
All right.
Golf, no. And so we decided that it was the National Council of Alcohol and Drug Abuse. Unfortunately, we had a family member who died of alcoholism, and I wrote 180 thank you notes to the people who came.
Perfect.
And so I promised my mother-in-law before she died that I would do something about this, and I did. And I felt that was a good compromise. Another year, I chaired the auction. So, but we had that conversation before.
So clear about what the role would be. Tell me about educational opportunities. Is that, do you expect board members to go out and get training on their own nickel, on their own time? What do you expect?
I don't think it's what they have to do. I think it's what they get to do.
Okay.
So, for instance, I think, in my mind, the boards that have the steepest learning curve are credit unions.
Okay.
And they have more initials than any boards I've ever worked with.
Right.
And you really get an opportunity to learn a lot.
Okay.
And that may mean going to a conference. That may mean 15 minutes of in boardroom education. Mm-hmm. But I think I've been on 38 boards. I think one of the things that has been the greatest benefit has been to learn from someone really smart.
All right, so I'm going to put you right on the spot here, Miss 38 board member.
Yep.
What's the only type of boards in the country that require, not only in the country, I'll say in the United States, require that you be financially literate, which has to do with becoming educated in financial. And a lot of people like you are afraid to be on a board because of finance. I'm smart, I'm good at marketing, I'm good at lots of things, but I'm not finance. What's the one type of board out there that requires financial literacy?
I know the answer to this.
What is the answer?
The one I wasn't on.
Oh, no.
Because I'm a financial moron.
We're gonna tear that up, but I'm asking you a trick question here, but it relates. You mentioned credit unions. Federal credit unions are one of the few entities out there that have a mandate, not surprising, from the federal government. All their board members within 6 months become financially literate. And the way they define that is they go through an educational process that teaches them the basics of financial literacy. So.
And I think we need to do that for every board.
Yeah.
And we'll go on to the next slide. This is, again, the expectations. But you need to have an ongoing process of being a learning organization, and that's our third point. It has to start with a powerful board orientation, and I think there needs to be, it has to be something where you look around the room and think, I have made a great decision.
Yeah, I love to be on this board.
I love to be on this board.
Sure.
And here's where board orientation goes wrong, is that the organization tries to orient the board to the new board member
to the board
to the organization,
versus,
and they don't ask the board members about their lives and what boards have you served on. And again, it depends on the organization, but you may have gone to college with Bill Gates. You may have finished. Bill, of course, did not finish. You may belong to a certain country club where they have the golf tournament. One of my favorite former CEOs is a guy named Dr. Peter Raven, and he's at the Missouri Botanical Garden. This guy, emeritus, fabulous guy. But when I sat down with Peter when he joined the board of the Center for Plant Conservation, which he now chairs, I said, tell me what you're really interested in. And one of the things he said was fashion. He's a plant scientist. And I said, what got you interested? Oh, Liz Claiborne and I were friends.
Oh, my.
Unfortunately, Liz has passed away. But he started talking about all of the people he's learned from. And I said, what's the most fascinating piece of work you're doing right now? And he said, I'm on the Papal Council on Science.
Oh, my.
And a week later, I saw him on NBC sitting in the front row, and he was involved in that climate change paper that the Pope produced. So if you listen to these people, you will know that they have incredibly fascinating lives and knowledge beyond the reason you got them.
Yeah, and that's a real trick, is to know your board members. And my sad part of that story is one of the early boards I sat on. I literally recall going into board meetings a time or two, and it was like I was invisible. They didn't know who I was. I mean, I wasn't introduced. It was like, what's this all about? And they weren't making good use of their board. And
well, it's a good thing you're decorative, Tom.
Oh, well, okay, if you say so. Moving right along.
Well, I want to talk about a glossary of terms, because this is fairly embarrassing, not my most embarrassing moment by any means, but I was on the board of the National Hemophilia Foundation, which uses so many initials, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Okay.
And so I'd been on the board for 3 years, and I said, is there a urologist on the CIRC committee? And many children are diagnosed with hemophilia at circumcision. And they said, what are you talking about, the CIRC committee? Why would we have a urologist on? And it turns out CIRC committee did not have to do with circumcision. It had to do with chapter internal relations committee. 3 years, and I didn't realize that. So that's pretty pathetic on my part.
So you're talking about, as a learning organization, just making sure that people understand key points, and the topics are going to come up. So if you're in a medical oriented board, or if you're in a plant science board or whatever, you literally, particularly in healthcare organizations today, they do a great job of having little books of acronyms and all. So it's
really
oriented.
helpful.
It's getting oriented. How about the purpose of the organization?
This is actually purpose of orientation.
Oh, even better.
And this is how to work together. And also, some boards have 0 staff. Some corporations may have a gazillion vice presidents, staff all over the place. How do you relate to staff? What is your role, and what is staff role? So for instance, if you're on the board of a local ballet company, you may be asked to paint scenery, to take tickets, to sell tickets, to be a tree on the stage, to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the little ballerinas. If you were on the board of the New York City Ballet,
you're asked to write a check, and what else?
Show up.
Show up.
And bring people. And not try to feed the ballerinas, because they don't eat. So what's the point?
There you go.
But it's completely different. And so, and you shouldn't be calling the CFO asking for information without going through channels, because you can't ask for a big block of their work time without permission.
So there are real protocols and mores and the standards of behavior for board members, and it's very important they find this out. Now let me ask you a question. I've heard you talk in the past about buddy systems.
Yep.
Or about mentors for new board members.
Yep.
Tell us about that.
I love board mentor programs. And one of the things I like about board mentor programs is that you can ask someone a question that you normally shouldn't ask in the group. So one of the things that happened with your experience is nobody took you from person to person and says, I'd like to meet Tom.
I didn't even know who the people in the room were.
Right. I'd like you to meet Tom Bakewell. Tom's joined our board. He's a CPA. He's a JD. He's a turnaround guy. And we're so glad to have him. And then the next person, I want you to meet Sarah. Sarah is the CEO of blah, blah, blah. And she's been on the board for 7 years.
Right.
And so it's a chance to bring people to really understand the organization and understand each other. A classic example, I worked with a board, and one of the board members said, one of the things that frustrates me about this board is I don't know people very well. And I said, how long have you been on the board? He said, 3 years.
Yeah, that's just really difficult and not right. What'd you do about it?
We spent about 30 minutes doing a little speed dating, getting them to know each other, talking around the room about what people's skills were. And the best part, I loved this, is one gal said, well, and nobody knew this. She said, well, I'm really good at accounting. And some snotty guy said, what do you know about accounting? You're a second grade teacher. And she said, that doesn't mean I wasn't a partner at Arthur Andersen.
Yeah, there you go. And that tells the whole story.
About both of them.
Right, absolutely.
So
now you dropped in here on the schedule. You got how to work effectively together. Before we talk about this board orientation here, What tips do you have about working effectively together, discovering how people can work effectively together?
I always ask people, and you cannot, and this is not true of corporate boards, but I ask them, how can we use your time effectively?
Okay.
And what talents would you like to share? And they cannot say in the nonprofit world, I'm not willing to fundraise. That's off the table.
Everybody has to fundraise one way or the other.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways to do it without asking for money, and that's really another talk.
Okay.
But in fact, somebody may really want to stretch another muscle, as we alluded to before. So they may be a plant scientist,
Right.
but they may actually be interested in early childhood education.
Okay.
And so you really have to ask them. I'm fabulous at washing dishes. That does not mean that I want to do it. I'm the best person in my family to do it. And my theory is everybody else should do it instead of me so that they could reach my standard.
Okay.
So, you know, people who have great skills may not want to share them.
So it's figuring out what the right match is with various people in the room and who's got the talent to handle what particular job.
And who has the time.
Who has the time. That's very key. So if you've got the tax partner of a big firm, you know during January through March or April 15th, you're not going to see them. But they may have time available during May and June and July to do a focus trip or focus piece of work. Please.
And same thing with retail. There are many industries where
Christmas is out.
Christmas is out.
Okay, very good. So what do you have here? Board orientation of HELP. What is HELP?
Help PSI has changed their name, and they are now BrightPoint, and they are one of my favorite organizations in the entire world.
Where are they based?
They're based in New York, and they're in all the boroughs. They have 9 locations, and what they do is they help people with medical challenges, and it can be anything from HIV. The population they serve are the underserved, people with HIV, homelessness, mental illness, former history of incarceration. It's a very difficult population, and they so strongly believe in their core values that this is just a wild idea. They believe they should apply in the boardroom. And so if you're part of this organization and you're not willing to live by their core values, my favorite one being have fun, be respectful, then you don't belong on their board. And I love that this goes from the person who welcomes you at the door to the person who's the chair of the board.
So you're talking about organizations doing a little different, being a little edgy here. Can you give us a few more examples of what some of those requirements are, other than to have fun? I mean, do they have straight people come into their board meetings? I mean, what do they do?
They have to be respectful, and that's really significant. They actually fired an employee who had a difficult to find skill, who was bilingual, because she was rude to a patient.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sorry, but the people who go here and get their medical care get better medical care than I do.
Oh my!
In the sense that I don't know about anybody who's listening, or you, Tom. Have you ever waited in a waiting room for 3 or 4 hours, or even an hour, and have the CEO come by, and this is what Paul Vitale does, and says, "How long have you been waiting? Can I get you something to eat or drink?"
Oh my! Well, that's a wonderful skill set and wonderful approach. So. You have this board orientation. What size board do they have, and how often do they do this?
They do it once a year, and they also take them, and it's a whole day orientation. It's not a short one. And right now they're bringing people out to the Bronx, and it is a scary place. It's a frightening place to grow up, to live, to work. And you really understand the life that their patients/clients are living.
Well, the point is that this organization, obviously, their patients live 24/7. They have people and customers, patients 24/7 that are living in difficult circumstances. So they have a great focus, and they help the board members succeed with a great orientation.
Great. And the other thing they do is they have a bunch of the clients speak at lunch to the board members.
On their board meetings?
No, at the orientation.
Sure.
And they talk about how BrightPoint, formerly Help PSI, has changed their lives.
Oh, that's neat.
And I've never been to one where I wasn't in tears.
Yeah, well, that's creating a terrific bond by highlighting their mission. Let's go to the next slide here and just look at another example or two of this. I think you're talking here about once a year spending a few hours or preferably a day where you look at the mission so that you know what your mission is, you understand what's really going on. You know, if I can tell a story shortly, I sat on a long-term care facility for the longest time. And down deep, I had an aversion to going into that facility, so I didn't really understand on a day-to-day basis what was going on. Now my life's changed, I've aged a bit, and I've had lots of experience at it, but at the time that was a disconnect from me, so I didn't really intellectually understand what it was all about, especially because I understood numbers, and that's what they were using me for, the numbers in the law. But I didn't have a good sense. Now you've got two organizations here, or is it three? You've got medical, an Appalachian, and what is that? A cricket I see on the right?
Yeah,
there?
that's my nephew Kevin Bachhuber, who is an urban cricket farmer. And
you're not pulling my leg here, are you?
No, we'll talk about him third. Okay. But the first one is a Da Vinci robot.
Yes.
And whether you are a hospital trustee or whether you're part of a company that works with people who use a for-profit company that uses it, you may not know this, Tom, and I don't know that you've ever done this, but you can use a Da Vinci robot to show people how it works. And one of my clients brings in board members and shows them how to use the robot, and they operate on a Purdue frozen chicken.
A Purdue frozen chicken?
Yes,
okay.
I don't know why they choose a Purdue frozen chicken. But in fact, they actually get to use the robot.
Oh,
I'm
very cool.
thrilled to death they're not using patients.
I would like that.
I think everybody's happy. But in fact, they have a story to tell. They go home.
So tee this up for me, though. So this would be the company that makes these, or this would be the medical facility that has a Da Vinci that's a very expensive device, or what's going on here?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So whether you're on the corporate side or whether you're on the nonprofit side.
If you're a director, you need to know about how this piece of equipment works. What's the price tag on one of these?
$1 million.
All right, well, that's nominal. Okay.
Yeah. So they need to know all about this, and you can come in and I don't know if other chickens work, but this particular hospital center I work with uses Purdue frozen chickens.
Good.
The next one is the Appalachian Trail, and this is a land trust I worked with,
right?
And they ask people to hike the Appalachian Trail.
Now wait a minute, that's
not the whole one.
I was going to say,
no.
What's it? 21 days from start to finish for the whole trail? Or
oh, maybe for you. For me, we're talking 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Okay.
But in fact, you have to be able to go through the trail and see what's going on.
Good.
Are there problems with litter? What are the problems? What makes it such a magnificent?
Yeah. Now this is on the East Coast. What's it run from up in New York all the way down to how far? I'm not literate on this. Help my man.
You know, I can't remember.
But it goes a number of the states on the East Coast up through the mountains and all. Good.
What I didn't know that I found fascinating is people who hike the entire Appalachian Trail, or even a large part of it, they have a trail name.
Oh my!
So, so it's about the culture of the trail.
Okay, well, let's go from the trail to
the cricket farm.
Cricket farm.
That's me on the left, and that's my nephew Kevin Bachhuber, and he is in Youngstown, Ohio, and he is producing crickets for human consumption, and he has tours. Don't give me that face.
You gotta follow.
Oh, excuse me.
So here's the question: Is this what I'm eating in my? Is this what I'm eating in my oatmeal, or am I getting this in my whey when I make my smoothie in the morning? Where am I getting crickets?
Okay, it's used primarily as a source of protein. Think about this, Tom. If they can make it into flour.
Okay. Now,
even though you're thin, would you rather have flour that's 80% protein or 80% carbohydrate?
I'd want to know what's in it.
Oh, Tom.
Okay.
You know.
So I'm not an early adapter. Okay.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Moving right
but
along.
There are a number of groups that are very interested in him. I know Ralston Purina is out there this week.
Okay.
So for-profit corporations are looking into the future of agriculture, as well as venture capitalists. And there are nonprofits that are willing to help him as well.
Okay.
And so he's done a TED Talk. He has spoken in Malta. He's spoken to the World Health Organization. This is one of the futures. It's 7 weeks for a cricket to mature.
Now, we're talking about mature, but what about board members? Tie this back to board members.
He has a corporate board.
Okay.
He's a for-profit organization that's partnering with nonprofits who are interested in entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And the other thing he's doing is Youngstown, Ohio, used to have 300,000 people. They're down to 60,000 people. They have no grocery store in Youngstown.
Okay.
And he's bringing jobs back.
Okay, so what you're saying is this is an urban setting, and this is something like a number of people are trying urban farming. This is literally an urban cricket farm. Very neat. Okay, so his board members would certainly, do they have to try the product? Do they have to taste it?
Of course.
Okay, well, I'm not lining up for this one, but maybe you can.
Unfortunately, I will eat anything that's deep fat fried. And as someone who's lived in the South, I find you a disappointment that you're not willing to try a deep fat fried cricket.
But what I would be willing to do is maybe invest in it. So see me about that after the presentation.
Great.
So what's this next slide about? Bring a board member on a mission or a mission trip. I mean, are you sending me down to the jungles, or where are you sending me? What are you doing to me?
It may be across town.
Okay.
It's anybody who is producing a product or giving a service that is working better, faster, cheaper. Yeah. And so let's say...
But you're saying at every meeting you're supposed to talk about your mission, doesn't it say right
yes. This is... there has to be at least 10 to 15 minutes of it. And then periodically you have to go and see something that's either working much better than you or showing a need.
So it's about connecting and understanding what your organization does.
And sometimes it's a brag session, and so you'll bring in somebody from marketing and they'll talk about the market share. And sometimes it's really a sad meeting.
Okay, so give me an example of a powerful meeting or a sad meeting where it really turns some heads or connected people to the organization. Time.
I was working with a wonderful hospital, and I said to the CEO, "What's your biggest challenge?" And he said, going to a cocktail party and having someone start a sentence with, "I was recently in your emergency room," because the emergency room is a disaster.
Translated, they had to wait for an hour or what?
Oh no, it was much worse than that. It was really bad. And one of the problems was there was a statue on the historic register near the emergency room and of Jesus, and it was a Catholic hospital, and they couldn't move it. And so they couldn't expand the emergency room. And you don't mess with Jesus.
So there was no space.
There was no space. And so he said, "I don't know what to do." And I said, "What would it cost to move the emergency room to a different area of the hospital?" He said, "It's phenomenally expensive." And I said, "Are you getting letters from people about the ER?" He pulls out this huge stack of letters. These are people who have had bad experiences.
Wow.
I said, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you call these people and ask for permission to share their letters with the board?" 100% of the people were glad to share their message because they feel they were finally being listened to.
Right, you bet.
And he handed a different letter to each one of the board members and had them read them out loud. This was not a good news, not a happy meeting. They had turned down a capital campaign previously to raise the money to move. And they didn't even have, even with the statue on the historic register, they didn't have enough space at that part. And so after reading all these letters, one of the guys said, "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen."
So they got another angle in getting their attention.
And the other said, and another person said, "If I can't safely bring someone I love here, I don't want to be on this board. We have to do this."
There you go.
And so that was their mission moment.
That's a great mission moment. Give me a little more lower key one on maybe taking people on a tour somewhere to flush out your bus there. Where are they? Are they going down to where are they going to the rainforest? Where are they going on that
They
bus?
could be. I've been on tours of the rainforest with clients, and that's pretty amazing. But also, it can be to someplace very close. So let's say you're partnering. There were 7 domestic violence agencies that were partnering. And the reason was, if you were living in one part of the city and you were being abused, then they didn't want to have you housed in that part of the city where your abuser could find you and your children.
They wanted to hide you out.
Absolutely. And so what they did was they had a tour of all 7 of the facilities. And one of the guys on the board, who was brilliant, and I don't know why nobody thought about it, he said, why don't we form a purchasing coalition so that we can get beds and supplies and food cheaper?
Great idea.
And it saved everybody money. But also this idea of, if you are abused in North St. Louis,
Right.
to send you out to West County so that you can't easily be found. And you will be safer, and you'll have time to reconstruct your life.
Yeah, so a lot to think through there. I have 20 questions that popped up on that in terms of getting to work and those kinds of things. But obviously a mission moment that got the organization thinking and connects them. On this next slide here, you've got a quote. It says, listen to how board members can be most effectively engaged. So tell me about that, and what's with this big chess piece there?
Yeah, I look like I have hepatitis in that. I think truly great boards treat their board members like chess pieces and not like checkers.
Very strategically.
Absolutely. And some people can move. What the difference is, in the game of chess, the pieces have different roles and move in different directions.
Right.
And in the game of checkers, every piece is the same
It's all
size
the
and
same.
move. So I call it the 10-ticket rule.
Okay.
So what people say is, okay, everybody's going to sell 10 tickets.
To a raffle.
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And
here's what I know. For every ticket I sell, you can sell 100.
Yes.
That's the way it works.
But in fact, you know me well. You know I'm terrible with money.
Yes.
And I should never be running your back office.
And proofreading is a bit of a problem too.
Yes, absolutely. I'm dyslexic.
Okay.
And so I may be able to sell 150 tickets, and I may be able to write your marketing copy, but someone's going to have to proofread it.
Right. Okay.
And
so what do I get to do instead of selling tickets? What am I up for?
Well, it may be anything. So let's say we're having an event and we need a venue, and you belong to a country club, or you have a friend who has a mansion, or you have a connection to be able to get us a farm site, whatever we're looking for, or an airplane hangar.
Gotcha.
So you may be able to secure the venue. Also, you may be a techie and be able to put it all together so that when people come in, they're going to be greeted, take their credit card with a swipe using a square. Okay. So that's valuable as well.
Well, let's move this along here. So it talks about questions to ask new members. Now, we've touched on some of this, getting an idea of what a board member can do. But what are some of the questions that you would ask again? Just run through that list there that you like.
I think the quote that I love is Board Source's quote, if you've been on one board, you know one board.
That's a good
End of
way.
story.
And
that's really a summary of this. Because in fact, if I've been on a school board, it may be very different from having been a church deacon or having been on a family foundation board or a family business board.
So when the board's bringing a new member in, they want to make sure the board truly understands not just the resume, but the power and the benefit and the talent behind that resume.
And also, if I've been on a corporate board, the average corporate board in the United States is 9. The average nonprofit board is 17 people. And so if I'm totally used to being on corporate boards, I might flip out when there's 28 people in the room.
Right. Okay.
So
very good.
Getting through that.
Yeah, and so what's this about the board members having people? You and I used to have people, but
yeah, we
what
don't.
About it? Do people have people today?
Not so much. Okay. What I find traveling is that other business people in the airport have the same thing. They have a computer, they have a cell phone, and they have Prilosec.
Okay.
And they don't have a secretary, and they don't have staff. And so you have to
even senior level executives today.
A few, but very few. It used to be the norm. And years ago, this has been documented by Dr. Ricky Abzug, who used to be at NYU, and she said if you got a board member, especially in the nonprofit world, but true in the corporate world as well, you got his, and it was always his, wife and secretary.
Okay.
When you join a board, Tom, is your wife signing on?
Yeah, don't go there.
Yeah, right. My husband isn't either.
And they're too busy with their own careers.
And they have their own
raising
things.
Their family and all those good things.
Right, and she's a busy professional. And so you have to find out if you make a recommendation, is there the staff? If you're on the board of Boeing, it's quite different than you're on the board of the local animal shelters.
Absolutely. And then you're talking about how you engage with people. I mean, you're literally there. Do I like to have email? Do I like to have phone calls? Do I like
Absolutely.
to be, it's always fine to call me after 7 o'clock at night, but don't call me in the morning. Okay. So what's just a nice little chart about with a big heart in the middle?
End of story. Reward good behavior. And it can be something as simple as saying thank you.
Okay.
And if you don't do that, and on to the next slide. This is.
Yeah. No, wait a minute. I got to ask about
Yes.
this now. This reminds me of something I had to do once upon a time at Easter with the Easter bunnies, or is this a bad memory of mine from Chuck E. Cheese? What's
No, this is a great memory for Charlene and Erica. They're both very, very high-skilled, very successful professionals. Charlene just had a son in this picture, and Erica just adopted a daughter.
So let me guess, board members that just have babies might be candidates to fall away from the board or not to fulfill their duties. They're really, really busy.
It was actually even better than that.
Okay.
They just wanted to celebrate their great news.
Okay.
And so not only did they surprise them with this incredible baby shower, they told people plan to stay an hour afterwards, we're going to have food, but they invited Charlene and Erica's spouses, and Charlene's parents lived in the area, and they were invited.
So what about the babies?
Well, she's pregnant.
Oh,
it's still inside.
I see. All right.
And
typical guy.
Yeah, right. If you may not have noticed, but Charlene is pregnant in the picture on the left.
Okay, so your point being here, there's times to have great fun with your board members, and it bonds them to the organization.
One of the things, I talked to both these women afterwards, and I said, I know that your life is changing, and they said one thing that won't change is our commitment to this organization. They're there for me.
Yeah, and it's moments like this that really bond people long term to an organization.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
you can't buy this kind of goodwill.
Nope.
Yep. Okay. Well, what's this about? Missing a meeting? Everybody misses the meeting sooner or later.
Here's the deal.
Are you the police? What's up?
Just the opposite. What I find too often is if someone misses a meeting and doesn't call, if they miss 3 meetings, someone calls them and
They're
says,
gone. They're gone.
You're off.
Yep.
It's over. Instead of calling, you need a board member, should not necessarily be the president, who calls and
I'm
hears.
checking in on you.
And
what happened? Where were you? You okay?
The conversation goes like this. We missed you at the board meeting, and then you stopped talking.
Great.
And I'll give you an example. I joined a board. They called me. I'd written this in one of my books. And they said, Carol, we missed you at the board meeting. And I said, my husband's going through chemotherapy. And the chemo nurse who comes to the house couldn't get the rituximab at 9 o'clock. And he started the drip at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And this wonderful board president was so smart. She said, may I share this with the board?
Oh, my.
And they brought us food. I mean, they were just wonderful. It's one of the organizations that's in my will. They were there for us.
All right. That's neat.
Conduct robust discussions in your board and committee meetings.
So you're talking about having real straight conversation with people? What are you talking about here? Are you shaking it up? Give me an idea.
Yeah. It's asking the hard question. And this is avoiding groupthink, and this is why you need a diverse board. One of the things that happens sometimes is a decision is made in committee, and you may spend 10 hours discussing it, and then you bring the recommendation to the board, and we'll say, well, we want to go forward with buying this building. And as a board member, you may say, well, did you look at other buildings in the area?
Okay.
And I've found board members saying, well, of course we did.
Right.
Don't get huffy.
Don't be defensive. What's this about the crime? Is the crime not asking the question or what?
No, the crime is bringing bright people together.
And not letting them have a say or what?
Yes, and just having them listen to decisions that have already made.
Right. Gotcha.
So ask for their input.
Okay. So get diverse opinions.
Yes, absolutely. Your board should know each other well enough to be able to weigh the inside of the trustee.
Right.
For instance, if it's a legal issue, I may have an opinion, but you happen to have the knowledge.
Sure. Okay.
And so that doesn't mean I won't mouth off and say, I think we should do this. But in fact, if I know you well enough, I know that you actually are probably right. And you have the information.
So you're saying a board chair has a responsibility here, basically, in that first paragraph, to make sure that everybody gets heard.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And sometimes there are actually people that think before they speak, and they need a little time. So it's taking the time and asking.
Yeah, but when you think, when you speak before you think, there's never a dull moment.
Oh no, that's
Okay.
absolutely
All
true.
right. Now, what's this about the next page here? Use your board members' time effectively. We've talked about that a good bit, but tell me a little bit more.
Well, we just assume that people have the same time challenges we do, and they don't. Especially during life transitions.
Right.
So when your kids go off to elementary school,
Right.
college, when you take on a new position at work, your time may go from 50 hours a week to 70.
Gotcha.
So, and again, you need to know each other well enough to know that your mom may be sick, or I have a sister right now who's
Sure.
dealing with some health issues, and that's going to be a part of my discretionary time is
So
going to
you
be spent on that.
you communicate effectively with board members or the chair or whatever to let them know what's best for you.
Right, and the other thing is religious holidays, and they have to be explained.
Right.
I have a friend who was on a board, and the board chair was Jewish, and he called on the first night of Passover, and my friend didn't know it was Passover, and he said, "How long is Passover?" And I think it's 9 days, and so he didn't call him for 9 days. Well, it turns out you only don't call the first night,
First night, okay.
and so
he was wrong on both counts.
yeah, he really messed it up. And so, so it's really knowing someone well enough to say, "Tell me what Ramadan means.
Right. Gotcha.
Tell me what do you do on Easter?
Mm-hmm.
What's Good Friday? Can you do something on Good Friday?
Yes.
Do you, whatever the
So
difference
it's
is,
paying attention to the details of having people
and being
work
respectful."
together. Absolutely. Okay. And how you reach out to people, of course. For me, since I travel 2-3 days a week every week, as you do likewise, either cell phone or email is the way to go. What other tips do you have on this? Anything?
It's the simplest thing in the world is on your contact sheet, highlight how they want to be contacted. So there are people who actually still use a telephone.
Right.
You can use them for calling people. A lot of our kids
Just don't call their landlines because they don't have.
They don't have
right?
landlines.
Gotcha.
But simply asking people, how do you want me to communicate with you?
Right.
One of my mentors, who is 23, says, why are you leaving me emails?
Yeah.
I said, what should I be doing? Texting.
Texting.
Oh, who knew? Do you know there are people who get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom who do not look at their email?
Oh,
I had no idea.
I had no idea. So let's put a close on it here. We've got this symbol here on BoardPaq, and we've done this program today. They have a tremendous ability to help people communicate with minutes and
They're the best.
board meetings. Tell me about it.
Well, what I love about BoardPaq is that it is an odd combination of confidentiality and transparency. And
efficiency, I might
and
add.
efficiency. And what I mean is that if a decision was made 5 years ago, you can find it.
Good.
And yet it is cyber secure. So it's the best of both worlds.
Great. Well, Carol, thanks for this great chance to talk about strategies to create an engaged board. And I know you're a terrific board member and do great work with boards. And thanks for the privilege. So I'm going to sign off here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And nice to be with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again to Tom and Carol for your wonderful insight today. If you have any questions or comments for today's speakers, their contact information is on the screen. If you have interest in learning more about BoardPaq, please send us an email, sales@boardpaq.com.